we now come to item 11, which is the review of drought restrictions for the 2020-2021 summer season. And I'd like to welcome from Council Ian Maxwell and Andrew Chin, and from Watercare Mark Bourne and Marlon Bridge. Now, I haven't checked who wants to speak and in what order, but I've got Ian right in my line of sight here, so I'll ask you to lead off, Ian. Ian and Andrew are both in the room, and Mark and Marlon are on Skype. Thank you, Ian.
Thank you, Your Worship. So the report today deals with amendments to the drought restrictions that the governing body applied in Auckland earlier this year in May. And essentially the report recommends moving towards a summer water restriction regime. So water restrictions will remain, but we are recommending that they be adjusted from what exists currently, what exists today. In particular, we're recommending changes around the use of handheld hoses. So these are hoses with triggers by both commercial activities and perhaps later this year by residential users. These recommendations arise from a process involving staff of both Watercare and Auckland Council, but also more recently a workshop that's involved at a governor level with yourselves and members of the board of Watercare. So since May, when the water restrictions were first imposed, Watercare and Auckland Council have worked together to mitigate the effects of the drought upon Aucklanders. So Aucklanders have responded extremely well, and you will have seen some of those diagrams in terms of demand from both residential and commercial users. So reduction has occurred in terms of water consumption. In addition, we have created new water sources for the metropolitan water supply system, some 40 million litres a day additional from earlier this year, from May, as a result of the Waikato additions. But by the end of, or by around Christmas, we're expecting some 40 million litres a day extra. That's both from the Waikato as well as a range of smaller bores at Pukekohe, Hayes Creek and Onehunga. And there's more to come in as we enter into next year. We've also introduced new non-potable water sources, and you've heard a little bit about that in the discussion just prior to us. So that's been developed and it's provided water through to the construction sector, car washing and house washing industries. It's not large, but it does exist. And also too, Watercare have improved the management of their metropolitan water supply system. And so that's reduced and is progressively reducing leakage, but it also allows for more water to be used from the Waikato River and the bores as opposed to using water from the dams. We're saving up the dams and the hanuas and the Waitakaris for summer. We believe our recommendations represent a cautious approach. Our city is not out of the woods yet in terms of the drought. Our dam levels are lower than normal, and there is uncertainty around future weather patterns. That said, the recommendations do seek to mitigate the impact of water restrictions, particularly on the commercial sector, on employment. This is a real issue, again, as you've just heard. The impact of COVID on our urban economy is working through, and if we can take advantage of the investments and changes that have been undertaken to date, we can perhaps mitigate that to some respect on our economy. We are aware any decision that you make, whether to keep the current water restrictions as they are or a decision to modify them, they each present risks. And so there are advantages and disadvantages for each, and we hope we've highlighted those in the paper and we can answer questions around those. Some of you may question why we are recommending changes for commercial activities around handheld hoses, but not residential. And the reason for this is essentially our cautious approach. Auckland water is largely used by residents. Some 70% of the water produced is used by the residential sector. And if restrictions are changed, it may change the perception in the minds of Aucklanders about the need to continue to save water. And there's a risk of runaway demand across households, and that's the area where the bulk of our water is utilised. The commercial use is significant, 30-odd%, but it is smaller. And we're working with large users and business associations, as you've heard. Watercare have done a lot of work with the association that's just presented around savings and best practice. And perhaps this drought, if it's got one shining element to it, an opportunity, is actually exactly what you've heard, an opportunity to promote best practice, to create associations, to create an incentive to better use water. So that said, our recommendations will include a review later this year. So if our water situation is better, if our dams are fuller, if the rains that we forecast do occur, we are indicating in this report an opportunity for the governing body to move to lighten summer restrictions for residential at that time. Conversely, if the water situation is poor, or if the commercial sector has had runaway usage, then there's an opportunity later this year, an incentive, if you like, to review that and create an incentive for the commercial sector to continue to watch their water use. So Andrew will run through briefly what's in the paper, and we've got Marlon Bridge and Mark Bourne from Watercare, and between Marlon and Mark, Andrew and myself, we'll respond to any questions. So Andrew.
Thank you, Ian. So the paper really just starts with the reflection on the decision that you made in May in the Emergency Committee, and that was to impose really quite high levels of restrictions, a complete outdoor hose use ban. And when Watercare recommended that ban, it was really about trying to incentivise those savings over a winter period. You need a harder ban over the winter when there's less outdoor water use. You're really trying that you need those savings to happen from indoor use because there's not a lot of demand for outdoor water use over the winter period. And luckily, through the work that Watercare have done, largely with some of the big consumers, our consumption levels delivered more than the targeted 5% savings. The next thing is the additional water sources that have been brought online. So the plan is for about 40 megalitres a day to be brought online before Christmas. Over half of that is now up and running with the Waikato treatment plant upgrade. It's also important to remember that we got consent to take the extra 25 million litres a day from Waikato with an agreement with Hamilton City Council. And that agreement says that over the summer we must have restrictions at least equivalent to Hamilton because they've granted us this allocation, and it would be really poor form if we had no restrictions and the people of Hamilton did have restrictions. Our current level of restrictions, and even with the proposed amendments, are still much stronger than those currently in Hamilton City Council. The report does move into a detailed forecast, and over the workshop on Monday, Mark Bourne did illustrate on the box and whisker graph what the forecast looks at. And really, the point of that is what is our risk of moving into a level 2 restriction space based on where the dams are, and the forecast was based on the dam levels at the 1st of September, the new augmentation coming on, and the anticipated behaviour of Aucklanders and their water savings. And they believe that there's a less than 5% chance that we will reach level 2, but we have to acknowledge the uncertainties around the assumptions of that. And I think that's where we get to the recommendation and the cautious approach we're taking. We've got about half of the augmentation water supply online now. Half is still to come. So there's a little bit of uncertainty about the additional sources, their timing and when they'll come online. Hickey's Bore, Hayes Creek and the Onehunga Bores all on target to come in for Christmas, but not here yet right now. And we also have the uncertainty about how Aucklanders will respond. And it's, I think, if there's one thing I'd like to emphasise most of all is the proposal here is not a lifting of restrictions. It's really easy and to think of a change to using a trigger nozzle and a hose pipe as lifting of restrictions, and if that perception is taken up by the general public and we have runaway demand, the issue becomes one where we have to move to deeper restrictions to control that runaway demand. The forecast is that we need to maintain at stage 1, we need to maintain 5% savings over this whole summer. So water use with a hose and a trigger nozzle, it is a pretty strong water restriction. I've done some quite coarse calculations, but compared to just using a hose with no trigger nozzle, you're probably saving over 70% of the water just by constantly watching it and controlling it, and the very act of the nozzle head itself. So the anticipation that yes, you can use water outside has to be reinforced with a very strong communications program that you can use water outside, but it has to be done carefully, and we must still keep saving. So that's very much around the balanced approach and the risks that we saw in relation to the decision.
Thank you very much for that, Ian and Andrew. Now I'll just check to see, Mark, are you leading for Watercare on this?
Good morning, Your Worship. Yes, both Marlon and I are available to take questions. We're very happy with the information that's been provided by both Ian and Andrew at this stage, and don't have any further comment in relation to the paper.
Thank you. No, that's really helpful to know that we've got a joined-up approach from Watercare and Auckland Council. That's really helpful. The recommendations have been moved by Councillor Cooper and seconded by myself. This is an important paper, so I'm going to separate the questions out from the comments. So please indicate to me if you have a question. I've already got 4 questions. Make that 5 questions. Make that 6 questions. It's happening all the time. First is Al Filipina was the first up. Councillor Filipina.
Thank you, Your Worship. I've got 3 questions, and they're very quick ones. One to Marlon and Mark. Mark and Marlon, what was the recommendation from the Board of Watercare in regards to the commercial use and residential?
Good morning, Councillor. Yeah, the Watercare advice is provided in the paper at clause 9 of the paper.
So just to confirm that they suggested that residential also be part of the changes to stage 1?
I think the important thing to note that since that advice was provided, as drawn out in the paper at clause 15, there was the joint council workshop. And following that workshop, the resolution that's before you was determined.
If I can just add to that, sorry. Yeah. If I can just add to that, we have what we've done with Watercare and Auckland Council staff is to work together on this, and it's like a process. And so we've taken into account the technical advice, but also to how we might, or what the potential impacts might be across our wider community. So we're presenting today a joint approach, a joint recommendation from both Watercare and Auckland Council.
Thank you. Sorry, Alf, just before you go to your next question, I've had a discussion with the chair of the Watercare board, and she's come back to me and said she's comfortable with it, including with the recommendation L, which has come from Councillor Linda Cooper, and I'm supportive of. So we just try to get a better definition of commercial use, so that you can't pretend that you're a commercial user and then go and say, oh, well, I've declared myself a water blaster, and now I'm going to water blast my own home, and that's my business. We need a little bit of certainty that people don't abuse that definition. So, yeah, I think Watercare and Council are joined up on this one. Your next supplementary, Councillor.
Yeah, so look, just to the Al, that was going to be one of the questions that I had left of the 2, so I'm glad that that particular one is in there. But question again to the team, are you telling me that with the recommendation that there's only commercial will be allowed, is that people in low socioeconomic areas, that if they wish to water blast their home or water their gardens, that they cannot do that, and they will have to end up getting a commercial business to water blast their house, water blast their deck, and water their gardens. And as a result of this, are we saying that for the people who are in low economic areas that can't afford to get commercial people in to do that, that they have to?
So, Alf, this is Andrew Chin speaking. Yes, the restrictions will not be lifted on the residential population, but it applies to hoses. So you can do cleaning with a bucket and a mop, and you can water a garden with a watering can under the current restrictions. So whilst it does apply, I should also flag that we are looking to review the situation as we get towards December, when we'll have more certainty about where the dam levels have got, more certainty around the augmentation projects, and also more certainty about the weather forecast as we move into January and February.
So just clarification, Andrew, you are saying in a very long way that no, they're not allowed to use the water blaster, and what they have to do is fill up their buckets, and if they wish to wash their house, they will do that with a bucket. And I'll save what I need to say in the comments, Andrew. I just wanted to get a yes or no, and the answer is yeah, they cannot use the water blaster to clean the house. Thank you.
That's correct.
I think the fair answer to that, Councillor, is that there is a delay before we review the restrictions on residential, one, to determine that we know what the weather patterns are for summer, which are still pretty unclear. We are getting the much drier than usual September at the moment. No increase in dam levels now for 17 days. In fact, we're lower than we were before. But by December, we will know both whether our lake levels have gone up, we'll know how the trial period has gone with the commercial operators, and we'll have by then we'll also have on stream some extra sources of supply. So it's not a ruling out of any change, it's a deferring for the major users of water, which is the residential sector. I think that's the point that Andrew made pretty clearly. Right, we come now to Councillor Desley Simpson.
Thank you, Your Worship. And look, given that the resolutions currently say you can pay someone to wash your car and water your garden, but you can't do it yourself, I'm interested in the residential side. And if it's factually correct that Aucklanders have responded well to restrictions and reduced their water usage significantly in excess of the 5% savings, and if it's correct that dam levels have recovered faster than was forecast in June, and if it's correct that current forecasts for spring, which is what I want to talk about, the month of spring, not summer, the spring season, not summer. So if it's correct for spring, that it's going to be average to dry as opposed to a drier spring than usual, my question is around whether we could trial Aucklanders using a hose with the right nozzle, and if we did trial that, can we change this like the Prime Minister does with her COVID levels very quickly, or do we have to bring it back to a governing body meeting? Do we have the ability, like the Prime Minister, to change levels like that?
I can have a go at answering that.
Have a go, Ian. I'm tempted.
So At the moment, the way that the resolutions are structured, it would need to come back to a meeting such as this today. However, we could perhaps draft resolutions which delegated some authority to a number of councillors, the Mayor and others, to review it. But at the moment, that's not what's provided for in the resolutions. We did feel that the monitoring through until late this year, December, November period, was long enough to actually get some figures about where the utilisation was, and also give some time for that spring weather patterns to emerge. So that was the rationale for choosing late this year.
Thank you. Councillor...
Okay, sorry, can I...
Oh, sorry, you got a supplementary, Desley?
Yes, I just want to check that the meeting that you're expecting to review this, it says by December, you're expecting this to come back to the governing body meeting at the end of November. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Yep.
So we're effectively, it extends the period out beyond the commercial, but we will be looking at it. If we get the big downpour that we've all been waiting for now 10 months and haven't got yet, of course we'd change the restrictions. If we get a continuation of the last 2 to 3 weeks weather pattern, we may still be in some trouble.
Okay, thank you. I'm looking out my window and it's raining, but I'll reserve my right to speak. Thank you.
Yeah, it may be raining, but the last 17 days we are behind where we were, and spring is when we expect rain. We actually haven't had a decent downpour while it's pouring down in the Waikato at the moment. That's just a fact of life. Okay, Councillor Linda Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I do reserve my right to speak. I had 2 questions. One is was actually probably to the Exterior Cleaning Association, but I know that people have been speaking to them. So I guess for me is if we support this today, which I do we have some way of communicating with the Exterior Cleaning Association that we'd hope they wouldn't just be leaping back to using our potable water, our high quality drinking water, but would continue to use as much non-potable supply as they could where practicable, because I know that sometimes it hasn't been practicable, but that they would continue to try and use that source as much as possible. So that was one question.
Look, it's Ian Maxwell here. I don't know, Marlon or Mark, are you able to answer that? I know Watercare have been working closely with the association and developing up best practices and so forth.
Yes, certainly it's Mark Bourne here. The intention is to maintain the non-potable sources and make that water available, and certainly encourage the continued use of non-potable water for non-potable purposes.
Thank you. And the other question is, Mr. Mayor, you've just answered a question from Councillor Simpson saying it was November governing body that would review that. It's got here by December. I do support that, but I do hope and encourage that we will have very good information from Watercare about the dam levels and better forecasts in November, that if we, I'm hoping, I suppose the question is, would you be willing to consider looking at that at the end of our November governing body meeting, which is the last week in November, because it might give more certainty one way or the other to our residents coming up to the Christmas period, so they can make arrangements. They have certainty before Christmas and the holidays.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor. Look, it would definitely be my intention to do that at the November meeting. December is too late. The advantage of the meeting in November is that we'll have a clearer forecast of rain for the summer period. There is a possibility of La Nina and tropical cyclones, but we'll also know whether we've hit the target that Watercare itself has set of 75% by November. And at the moment, to achieve that target of 75%, we would have to get 50% more rain in the next 5 weeks than we've had in the last 5 weeks. So just think about that for a moment. Weather forecasting is absolutely uncertain. I've just looked at I've got it open on my app in front of me here. For the next 10 days, the 10-day forecast, we've got a condition called rain on one of those 10 days with a few showers on some of the other days. Occasional rain today, but the promise is there from the forecast, and somehow week after week after week it doesn't deliver for us. And if we go and we lift the restrictions now, I don't think you can turn it off and on. If you change the mindset that we don't need to save now, and then we find that it's going to get much worse, I don't think the wider electorate will thank us for trying to switch something on and then off again, because it'll be bloody hard to do. Okay, thank you for that. Councillor Angela Dalton.
Thank you, Your Worship. I was hoping to get some answers to my questions. I think you've answered the first one, which is we've got 20 megalitres more now than we did at the 7th, from the 7th of March 25, and by December another 20 or 15? Total of 40. All right, so 25 at the moment. And how much additional water is required if the ban is lifted for commercial? So my thinking is, how many megalitres a day for commercial if we lift the restriction?
Sorry, I'm just booting up. Mark Bourne did provide us some answers there. So
Sorry, as a point of order, I've seen a list of questions from Councillor Dalton. I think they're good questions. So, Councillor, would you just like a series of answers to those questions now rather than you having to put them individually?
I would, but supplementary around the 75% if I can at the end.
Yep, that's no problem. So, Andrew, if you want to go through the questions that Councillor Dalton has put, and then she'll have a chance for a supplementary after that.
So how much water, so question one was how much water is, additional water is online, and that was from the Waikato treatment plant upgrade, and that was 25 million litres a day. And how much additional water is required if there was, if the ban was lifted? So I'm assuming that this is if there was unrestricted use? No, with the... so how much additional water would be required from residential users if we still had level 1 restrictions with the hose pipe and the trigger nozzle?
Yes.
Okay, so there's not an exact answer to this question. The Watercare forecasts anticipate that demand will go up. So between now and every month going forward into summer, the demand will increase. Traditionally, they'll see 15 million litres additional water being required. And roughly, if you split that, 70% residential and 30% the commercial, and that's where we get those figures. Further on, towards November, there's an additional 20 million litres a day demand. Once again, you probably apply that 70%, 30% split. Because we don't, it's quite difficult to split to get accurate data or exact data on what is commercial use and residential use. For example, the Exterior Cleaning Association were using water at a residential property, so you can't say, well, how much of their monthly use was residential and commercial. So we've had to make some pretty large assumptions. But for the residential, and Mark, please jump in if I've got those numbers wrong. I believe, so for the commercial, it was in the next month about 2 million litres a day. Yeah, and the residential, I believe, 5 to 6 if the restrictions are applied. Mark, is that correct?
Yes, that's the best estimate based on the available information. The savings required in November amount to about 20 million litres of water a day. As we move through summer, the savings required peak in February at 30 million litres per day.
So we answered both the residential and the commercial there. Question 4, can we confirm the online water in December? We've answered those questions. Yes, Hickey's Bore the Onehunga Springs and Hayes Creek coming online provide the balance of the 40 million. Question 5, have the predictions done for the Christmas holiday period? No, I don't. No, we haven't done those particular differences on how the holiday period will be done. Mark, do you have anything to add on that one? It's included in the baseline forecast based on previous years.
Yes, sorry, I can confirm that, Councillor. So the forecast that we've projected for December of this year includes an increase over and above the consumption in November. But I would also point out that the forecast also includes a substantive increase in both January and December, which is also observed in prior years.
Okay, and the sports fields. So I did contact Kirk from Community Facilities, and so the issue for a lack of irrigation on our sports turfs comes from some of the cracking, so the clay in the subsoil cracks, then the sand subbase below the turf falls into the cracks, creates holes, and then creates a hazardous turf for people to run on. So when a turf has been exposed to that type of cracking through a lack of irrigation, if you completely redo the turf, it's about $60,000 to $100,000 per sports field. Under the constrained budgets this year, because a lot of our turfs suffered over last summer, it was the driest summer we've had, they've done patch-ups, so they've filled sand into where those cracks are to as a temporary fix. And repairing those turfs in the long term will be required for investment in the long term plan eventually. I haven't got the figures for what that forecast is across the region right now, but this is the operational issues that they'll be looking to develop that forecast. But I can confirm that the Community Facilities team, in preparation for this summer, has undertaken a whole lot of measures. We described some of them in the report, but using wetting agents on the sports fields so that the water that does apply lasts longer. They've also investing in new bore sites for irrigating the sports fields with groundwater for the summer, as well as soil moisture sensors on a lot of the automated irrigation. So the soil moisture sensors you can irrigate now and under level 1 restrictions going forward with the adjustments if you have those kind of sensors and controlled irrigation systems.
My supplementary is to water care, and that's, so in the report, water care has set the target of achieving 75% dam water storage levels by the 1st of November. I'm assuming that that underpins the strategy for being able to lift the restrictions today. Watercare's recommendations of residential and commercial. So, and the Mayor's indicated that the rain's not looking to flash, and that's going to be pretty hard to achieve based on what we've been experiencing. So what confidence can we have that that target can be achieved to enable the lifting of the restrictions?
It's Mark Bourne here. I'm happy to respond to that question, if I may. I would draw Councillor's attention to the chart that's provided in the paper at clause 33, and that provides an indication of the actual lake level storage in the past, and then provides a statistical forecast as to what future lake levels might be. The basis of that calculation is founded on actual lake levels as at 1 September. So if lake levels were to increase through to our target of 75% by 1 November, it would in effect increase the lake level storage forecast plots. So that information provides a conservative view of what lake level storage would be. So based on that statistical analysis, we're comfortable with what's being proposed in terms of effect on lake levels and the ability for Aucklanders to continue to have access to potable water.
Thanks, Mark. Can I just ask a supplementary to that? I mean, time will tell whether we reach it or not, and we'll know that by the time we have to make a decision, which is really important. And we all hope that we do reach it. But in that calculation, have you taken into account that weather patterns may have changed now, given the last 2 years' experience, because of climate change? Have you built any prediction around climate change into those calculations?
Climate change per se, or any new information within the past 2 years hasn't been built into this model. This model was developed jointly with Auckland University and engineering consultants firm and ourselves, and it utilises 120 years of actual rainfall record within our water supply catchment, so it's actual record in the catchments as opposed to in Auckland City, and then that rainfall record is then synthetically changed to produce 1,000 years of data. So climate change and the predictions of climate change going forward is the next iteration of the model and hasn't been included as yet. However, I would point out, though, that the statistical analysis includes a reliability factor of 99.9%, so 1,000-year reliability, which is indicated by the red line.
Thanks, Mark. It's just when you have 2 1-in-100-year droughts in a row, you start to wonder about probabilities. Okay, next question is Councillor Chris Darby.
No, I'll pass for now. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor John Watson. Are you there, John?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Sorry about that delay. I'd just like to go to a part of the report, if that's okay, that's slightly different from this, and that's the one dealing with the effects on non-reticulated communities, which occur in points 39 to 40 something in our paper, and I'm just really seeking a little bit of assurance here in terms of the solutions or responses, if you like, to conceivably another dry spell, and it really goes to how effective they might be on the ground if they're rolled out. So the first one, about encouraging people to install further tank capacity, and these are targeted communications we're talking about here. I just really asking what form those communications will be. I mean, do we have a rough order of price now? Do we have excess tank capacities only of use, of course, if you get enough rain for your existing tank to fill over. So, and I'm just thinking in terms of these immediate months coming up, that seems a little hopeful to me that we might get those sort of events over that period. So what's the form of the targeted communication in terms of that extra tank capacity then to these unreticulated communities?
Yes, I can answer that. There will be a notice going out in the November rates bill. It's quite hard for us to send a specific letter out to people with rain tanks because we don't actually have a database of all of those residents. And there are other issues that, whilst, as we found when we tried to send out letters to all the people we thought had septic tanks, sometimes the letter goes to the owner, not to the resident, and it is the resident that we're targeting in terms of the behaviours that we want on the property. So yes, so there'll be a notice going out in the November rates release to all Aucklanders that will capture the people on rain tanks and be targeting them specifically. And it's not just encouraging them to get another rain tank if they can, but really to book early with their water carrier, make sure that they monitor their tank and they've maintained their gutters and their levels of their existing tanks. Those key messages are really important. We're also investigating getting bore water supplies up and running close to the high density communities where the unreticulated communities are. However, we're trying to follow the model that we rolled out on Waiheke Island. So Waiheke Island don't have a municipal network to provide the insurance for their water supply. They got a real scare in 2017 when a lot of people ran out of water and the water carriers couldn't keep up with the demand. In the following year, and for the drought that we had last summer, it was just as severe on Waiheke Island as it was on the mainland, but we didn't have the major issues of people running completely dry over there, partly because we got the messages out early, the water carriers got more organised, and they were able to manage those demands over a longer period. But we also had the welfare water stations set up at Onitangi Sports Ground and down near the ferry terminal. And we will be providing those welfare water facilities so that people always will have water if it's getting tight, but their key insurance is to book their refills early and monitor their consumption early.
Okay, thanks, Andrew. Just a quick follow-up, Mr. Mayor, if I may. And it goes to that limit at those welfare water stations, Andrew, of 20 litres per person per day. I'm hoping we're going to have a little bit more give and take in that if it comes to that. I mean, 20 litres a day is not even 3 toilet flushes, you know, in an average household. So I would suggest that 20 litres a day isn't going to go too far in a household, and I'm assuming there'll be a little bit of flexibility there if we get to that.
I was going to say, of course, 20 litres a day is a guide, but we're very relaxed about people coming and filling up. The people we turned away were those turning up with a very large tank on a trailer, because we couldn't keep refilling the tanks fast enough if people turned up taking that kind of volume. But whether it was a 20 litre container, 30 litre container, we were quite relaxed. It is very much the last resort.
Okay, thanks, Andrew.
Thank you. Councillor Pippa Coombs.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you to everyone who's worked on this. I have a couple of questions. One is just probably more of a clarification around the decision that we're making. And apologies if this is really obvious from the report, but by changing the restrictions, so we're deleting the words or water blaster, we're saying that water blasters are going to be allowed. So that's a new change. Because when I look at the table 3, it doesn't say that that is the change. It says the recommended option is to enable handheld hose use with a handheld trigger nozzle, but it doesn't say to enable water blast use. So is that kind of a oversight, or?
Water blasters all have a trigger nozzle. So right, they fall under the definition of a hose with a trigger nozzle, albeit a high pressure hose.
Great. I'm glad you clarified that, because I was doing a word searcher on blaster and I couldn't see where that had been picked up. The second question the Mayor has asked around, this is a question to Watercare, around the gap in the modelling, and this is at paragraph 35, and I think the Mayor's already asked that, and it's been confirmed that climate change has not been included in the modelling, and that's recognised by Watercare as a gap. So I'm just curious why that's not highlighted when we look at the climate impact statement at, find the paragraph. I would have thought that would need to be highlighted as an issue.
That's an oversight on my part, and I apologise for that. Yeah.
That's okay, and I forgive you for not knowing the name of Auckland's climate plan as well. But, you know, it's a brand new plan. We've all got to get on board for that it's actually Auckland's Tarukia Tawhiri, Auckland's climate plan. And I think I might have also mangled it then, so all forgiven.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm sorry, there was a question to Watercare there.
The question to Watercare, again, to
correct.
the extent that it hasn't been answered, Mark, is it you?
My apologies, Councillor. Can you repeat the question?
Well, I think it was just confirmation that Watercare has acknowledged that it's a gap in your modelling. It's not spelt out in the report, it's just not mentioned that climate change needs to be in the modelling. The Mayor did ask the question, but it wasn't picked up in the climate impact statement. So I just wanted to make sure we're joining the dots and that work is going to get underway.
My apologies. Yes, certainly I can confirm that the basis of our integrated source management model is historic in terms of actual rainfall record, and what the next development of that model will be picking up the work that both Watercare and Council have jointly done in identifying the potential impacts of climate change, so it becomes more of a forward forecasting model rather than based on historic information.
Thank you, appreciate it.
Thanks, Mark, that's really helpful. Deputy Mayor Bill Cashmore.
Thanks very much, Mr Mayor. And following on from John Watson's comments, Andrew, about the unreticulated communities, acknowledge the work that Healthy Waters did last year with the emergency provision, but also with the bulk tanker work. I just want to make it very, very clear that this coming season, if we have to use those bulk tankers again, the carriers will be paying for the water they receive. It will not be a free service. So the end consumers will end up paying a bit more for their water than what they would under normal circumstances. Is that correct?
That is correct. We, under an emergency, we funded the milk tanker service, $1.4 million last summer. It was unbudgeted expenditure. We simply don't have the headroom to provide that under the emergency budget. So if we get a very prolonged drought again and that kind of service is warranted, it'll have to be on a user pays basis.
Thank you. I'll make sure it's very clear publicly.
Thank you. Councillor Daniel Newman.
Thank you, Your Worship. I just want to go back to the integrated source management model for a moment, just to confirm. So my understanding, based on what has been articulated today, that the integrated source management model is a longitudinal rain data series with a 99.9% reliability. That's correct?
I'll defer that to you, Mark, if you can.
Sorry, correct, Councillor Newman. It has in effect 1,000 years of rainfall record within the model.
Okay, well, that's good, because that's a better model of longitudinal information than I think that I've seen at Council so far. So based on what you have provided there, your statistical analysis, which you've set out in the chart 1 of water supply forecasting, then the next step would have to be to add in the additional water that has been brought into service since August 2020. Which we know we've got. That would be correct?
That is correct. So the way the model works is it runs through that 1,000 years of rainfall record, and then it also contains all of the sources of water. So as new sources of water are brought in, the model is updated to reflect that. So the model would preferentially draw down water from non-dam sources. So in other words, the increased capacity at Onehunga and the new bore expansions. Correct.
Okay, I think that's really, really important. I then we go back to para 31. So it says irregular contact with top commercial customers. We've got Fruitcore, Lion, Griffins, Chelsea Sugar, and Auckland Council. So those private providers A lot of people in my ward work at those companies. I want their jobs to be saved. That's really important. But then I want to talk about Auckland Council, because we're going down to paras 65 and 66. 64 through to 66. 67, sorry. I mean, so if we look at Auckland Transport's concern about access to water for construction, because they would do a lot of construction over the spring and summer period. I don't know the total quantum of the work that will be required there. I'd like them to do a heck of a lot more work in the renewal space. But then we're dealing with the community facilities sports fields. We've got 850 sports fields. Would it be a reasonable would I be drawing a reasonable conclusion if I were to say that probably one of the single largest beneficiaries of the concession for the commercial sector here would be Auckland Council itself? That the benefit that we receive from being able to access water, and it won't just be the non-potable, it'll be the water, potable water that we use for our sports fields, we will be one of the single biggest beneficiaries of increase of providing for the concession to the commercial sector, and that we will enjoy that benefit, for good reasons, for our ability to irrigate our sports fields over the spring and summer period. Would that be fair?
I'd probably qualify it. We do get some benefit for some of the watering. Most of the watering is not done with handheld hoses. A lot of the irrigation systems are automated irrigation systems, and where we put in the soil moisture sensors, they are enabled under the current level of restrictions. The area of probably key benefit is around cricket pitches that do get that kind of hand watering. So we get to protect those cricket pitches and those areas that require hand watering. But I wouldn't say it's the majority of our irrigation water use.
Perhaps if I can just add something just additional. So our current water consumption, Auckland Council's water consumption, is down around 30%. So we've been working hard to achieve those reductions. We're also working with Watercare around the reuse of wastewater. So wastewater from their treatment plant. So we're looking to have a pilot system on the North Shore around the Rosedale treatment plant operational, and we've also been looking to and developing bores, stormwater retention ponds and so forth within our parks. So over time, Council will reduce its reliance on potable water, but we are a big user, and it will take some time to implement that.
Yeah, look, I mean, firstly, I'm a cricket tragic. Two, in cricket, I was a batsman, so I don't like see wickets, but I absolutely need to have wickets. The point being that it's quite a hard sell for me to go and tell my constituents, this will be more of a comment later, about the need for them to continue to conserve and for us to restrict them. But actually, when you look at some of the biggest users, Council itself is one of the biggest users, notwithstanding our very good efforts to move from potable to non-potable water. So the consumption, some of the consumption benefit here will be for Auckland Council as part of a move to provide for a differential approach between the commercial and the residential sector. That would be fair?
Yes, it would.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for that figure of 30%. Would that make, if I throw in a supplementary here, would that make Auckland Council probably the biggest saver of any of the big users?
I'm sorry, I can't answer that. I don't know if, Mark, you've got any information about some of the other larger users around Auckland?
Yes, I can answer that. As Auckland Council is our second biggest customer, but they are also one of the largest contributor to the savings that are being made across Auckland.
Yeah, so I think that makes us all a little bit more comfortable that we're not trying to rort the system to suit us as against the people we represent. That's very helpful. Councillor Richard Hills.
Thank you, Mayor, and I'm sorry the neighbour seems to be screwing some bolts into the fence. So if you hear that, that's what that is. For me, I kind of understand, yeah, it's about saving jobs with the water blasters. I do have concern around, someone looking at their neighbour will have a private company water blasting and they can't do the same. But I'm more concerned in general if there is a push to release everything today, and I'm not sure that's where people are going, but and then having to go in much harder restrictions. So my question is to whoever wants to answer it, what level were our dams sitting at? And I actually know the answer, but just in case for anyone who can't read our report, what were our dams sitting at this time last year before we had to go to restrictions?
Can you answer that, Mark?
Yes. So at the end of winter last year, dam levels were at 89% before the summer commenced.
Yeah. So I guess we're 20% behind already. My other concern is it true that without restrictions, even with billboards, even with radio advertising, even with Ravine on almost every news show and the Mayor too for February, March and April, we were still using 480 litres per day in April?
I'm just confirming the number, the volume in April. The average in April would have been probably around about, certainly ranged during the peak of April was 480 million litres, and the minimum amount consumed in April was 435 million litres. So probably something in the order of about 450 million litres over the course of the month. But I think the important thing is what our expectation in April was. We expected consumption to be about 460 million litres, and the average over the month, as I say, was probably about that 450. At the end of April, consumption had got down to 440 million litres.
Yeah. And so we have, how much we have by December? Isn't it? 40 million litres extra. But how much are we going to expect Aucklanders to be saving in summer compared to we were doing 580 litres a day some days in December, January?
Yes. So the peak month for consumption is typically February, and the average consumption last February, the peak day was the 560, as you've correctly pointed out, but the average through February was close to about 540 million litres. What the modelling that we've done and the analysis and our expectation is that consumption will be less than 510 million litres. So we're looking to reduce demand in the peak of summer by 30 million litres per day. And as you pointed out, we will have an additional 40 million litres of water per day coming into supply by then.
Okay, and I guess my other question is, so if your modelling technically doesn't consider climate change, but we had Ravine all over the media earlier on this year, basically saying we were a bit surprised by this drought of a 1 in 200 year drought. What if we get, as the Mayor said, our second 1 in 200 year drought while we're starting 20% behind going into summer? And we're wanting people to cut back further.
My apologies for over-speaking you there.
No, it's fine.
I just draw Councillor's attention to chart 1 that's provided in the paper. And whilst our integrated source management model doesn't specifically allow for climate change, which is a future-focused activity, and the model is based on historic rainfall record, the red line that's indicated in there is the equivalent of a 1 in 1,000 year drought. So if we had successive 1 in 100 or 1 in 200 year droughts, 2 years in a row. That's what the dots represent. So the black square, which hopefully is people can see on their hard copy paper, represents where lake levels would be if a 1 in 200 year drought started from the 1st of September. If it was a 1 in 100 year drought, it's the red diamond, and that indicates where lake levels would be.
Okay, so if considering we were up in the 90s in December and we were still at 75 in January, if we have the same sort of rainfall again, even with all the predictions, if they're even worse, does that mean that we would be sitting in sort of 25-30% full in April when we had to put on restriction? I'm just, we got a lot of criticism for not predicting and not planning, and it sort of feels like we're in a worse position going into summer, and we're thinking of removing restrictions which could drive us into. So I guess what happens what is the planning for January if suddenly we are well over our usage and the dam levels are well below where we hoped? What would we do in January, February?
So just once again, I guess I'm speaking to the chart that's provided in the report, and the big difference is going into summer this year, whilst lake levels will be lower than they were last year, there is three things that are very different from last year. The first is we are proposing to maintain restrictions in place throughout summer. Maintaining those restrictions will curb that very high level of demand, whatever form those restrictions are in. The second is there is additional water that will be into supply by Christmas, so that additional 40 million litres of water will mean lake storage levels will also reduce further than they would have done if that water wasn't available. And the third, whilst yes, there is still some uncertainty about what the actual weather is going to be, the current forecast is a different forecast from the forecast last year.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. That's all very helpful. Councillor Efeso-Collins.
Oh, thanks. Thank you, Mayor. Just a couple of questions. Can I just touch, I think this is a water care question. Can I just come back to, I've appreciated the questions that have been asked by both the Mayor and Councillor Hills just now. Can I just on the integrated, what do you call it? The integrated source management model. Can you confirm that that's a model that has been in place for close to 20 years? I'm reading an article at the moment that was written by Dr. Deborah Cornby of Watercare Services Limited, and I think with the date, I'm trying to find the dates of this this paper that Dr. Cornby has written, and I'm guessing it's around 2000, 2001, and makes reference to your system then. So has that been an integrated system that's been in operation for close to 20 years?
This model has been. We actually had a model prepared before that as well. So the water supply system in Auckland prior to the Waikato River was made up of the 10 dams spread around the region, and in operating those dams conjunctively, so imagining we operate all dams as if there was a single dam, actually increases the water available. So we've always had a model, when I say always, certainly for the past 30, 35 years, always had I'll use the term sophisticated computer model to aid us in decision making as to where we draw water from. And the purpose of the model is to maximise the output from those dams.
Yeah, no, I completely accept that, and the article says that as well. But that said, the fact that in the last 20 years, or however long it's been, the model hasn't been adjusted to a degree for climate change, And there was reference earlier from Councillor Newman around the reliability of the model and its high percentage of reliability. Would you say that level of reliability can be sustained in a model that's, 20, 30 years old and hasn't been adjusted in its formula for climate change?
So the model is adjusted in effect continuously. So each year that passes since the model is built provides more data. And so each summer that we get, or each winter that we get, each drought event or each flood event provides additional information for the model. So the model is continuing to be developed. I guess my comment around climate change specifically is trying to anticipate what the future looks like in 20, 30 and 40 years' time. And is that going to change the veracity of the droughts that are currently built into the model?
Yeah, no, that's cool. Thank you. And just the last kind of one question, Mr. Mayor, in relation to points 47 through 50 of the report, it talks about kind of the communications that's been ongoing, but in the table that's provided where it's been recommended to the governing body to go with option B, one of the points that's raised in the disadvantages is communications are more complex. I would be interested in some feedback from the officers, and I'm not sure who, as to how well they believe the communications has been delivered to Aucklanders, given the comments Councillor Hills just said too about the CEO of Watercare being on lots of programs and talking about the water crisis we're going through at the moment. But given that the communications is going to be complex, which is in the report, and that in point 50 it talks about, I think it's 50 or 49, it talks about that they are looking at a paid media campaign kind of profile that's being investigated. I'm just wondering how they would see how successful the communications plan has been to date.
Perhaps if I can start that, and perhaps Marlon, you might be able to contribute to this. But certainly I think if you look at the outcome of, in terms of water consumption, the communications campaign has been successful to date. The issue of complexity looking forward was really associated with some of the matters which councillors have raised today, and that we are looking to reduce the level of, or change the level of restrictions associated with commercial use and delay that for residential. And so there was it becomes a little more complicated, a simple message will need to be modified to reflect that distribution. But I don't know, Marlon, do you want to comment on the communications plan so far?
Yes, and thanks. Just to add to that, I think if we look at the savings that have been achieved over the period, and we talk about the 4 billion litres of water that have been saved by Aucklanders over the last 6 months, I think the campaign itself has been a reasonable success in what we've tried to achieve, and that's further accentuated by the fact that 98% of those that have been surveyed through this process know it is important to save water right now, as well as the fact that we've had this strong uptake on those who now take shorter showers. At 62% of those that we've done surveys around the awareness of what this is. A key point, though, that I'd like to make is some of the stuff isn't visible, which is the high level of face-to-face engagements that we've had with our commercial customers, and particularly our larger commercial customers, because they've also made a significant contribution to the savings that we're talking about in relation to how we've managed to get to where we are today.
I can perhaps add to that. I know Auckland Council, being a large user, and myself, along with others within Auckland Council, have been sitting down with the water care officers. We've introduced new meters. We're able to track our progress, and we're just an illustration of what water care and the major users have been doing right across the city.
Thank you. Councillor Greg Sayers.
Thank you very much, Your Worship. A great paper, a lot of work's gone into it. My questions relates to the clause 43, and I'm very pleased to see that clause in there that and the Deputy Mayor alluded to it as well. If the worst case scenario, we might not have a legal obligation to get water out to people who aren't on the metropolitan supply, but we certainly have a moral one. So I'm very pleased to see that there. The user pays aspect of that, yes, that's I could certainly endorse that. But my questions are, there's two. One is around probably, if we need to use these bulk tankers as a last resort. I assume that goes back to the risk of the bores, particularly not being in place in time to supply these tankers with potable water. So I'll give both questions. The first one is around, is there any comment from the officers around the risks, could be consenting, whatever, to get these bores in place? Are there risks there? And secondly, have the bulk milk tanker firms that we may need to commission, have they had any type of preliminary heads up given to them, just that we may need to call on them in the case of an emergency, Your Worship? Thank you.
I can certainly answer those questions, Councillor Sayers. Firstly, I'll start with the last one. Dines Transport was the company that we used for the milk tankers. We're actually using them for the non-potable water, so their commission hasn't really stopped, and they also provide those very large, they call them LSM storage tanks that are there to taking water from Western Springs and filling up those tanks and then supplying it to the construction sector. So we've been in closely working with them. In relation to the bores that we're investigating, each site's different, but the key things that we need from those bores are yield. They've got to be a decent bore, well over 100 cubic metres a day, to give the amount of water we need. Then water needs to be of fairly good quality, because if it's too dirty, it'll cost too much to treat it to a standard that can be used in rain tanks. And thirdly, it has to be in the right location. The whole purpose of the milk tanker system was to remove the travel time from the private carriers. So Beachlands is a good example where there's a large community there that are on rain tanks, but it's a 30-minute drive one way to the nearest filling station in Otara. So by setting up the milk tankers, the private carriers can fill up twice, 3 times the number of rain tanks in a day. So we're looking at a couple of opportunities. There's a community facility at Te Puru Park that has a decent yielding bore, but the one that we're really hoping can get off the ground, the quarry that's privately owned, they are prepared to underwrite the cost of developing the bore and the treatment plant associated with it, but they do require a consent. The consent is to do with truck movements, operations of the quarry and those kind of things. To aid them, we have written a letter of support of their consent application on the grounds that it's providing a public good for the community to have that water source available, and we also feel that the vehicle movements will be reduced. So that's the kind of thing that we're doing. And each site around the region that is close to these communities have got their own particular issues. So yeah, we are working very hard, but we can't guarantee that we'll have those bores up and ready until a bit further on through the year.
Thank you, Councillor Sayers, and I think the point that you've made, and Councillor Watson, Deputy Mayor Cashmore and myself, is that we don't have a legal obligation to supply, but none of us want to contemplate a large section of our community this summer, if we have a continuing drought, people not having access to the basic necessity. They'll have the emergency water to drink, but they also need to flush their toilets. They also need to have showers. So I think we are the provider of last resort, but having told people they should increase their tank storage, if they want us to do that, then we will look at recovering the cost of providing that service. We've got 2 last questions, and then we'll get into the debate, if we can do that before we eat. The next question is from Councillor Josephine Bartley.
Thank you, Your Worship, and thank you for this report. I just wanted to know, given what we know and what we've experienced, and without any of you responding to me with ifs, is it fair to say that water shortages are the new norm?
Yes, I would say the effects of climate. I'm one of, and I think this was covered somewhat in the workshop that you had on the water strategy earlier in the week. But it should probably be expected that summertime unconstrained water use every summer in Auckland is something that we have to change. We shouldn't be able to have the idea that we've got an infinite amount of this resource available to us in every summer. So yes, I think water restrictions should be, summer water restrictions at the very least, should be part of the new normal.
Okay, thank you.
That was a straight answer and a courageous one. Yeah, last question, Councillor Desley-Simpson.
Well, thanks, Your Worship, and it's good that I'm following that one because my question, I have two quick questions, and for a number of people, the general rates increase from 2.5% to 3.5% was to mitigate our water supply issues. So if we've increased that supply from the Waikato, if we have upgraded the Waikato water treatment plant, if Hickey's Bore is on track for October and Papakura Hayes Creek Dam is on track for December and Onehunga for December. When I was going to ask, when do you think we will get to a stage where we haven't got water restrictions? But I think the answer, and I've just heard Josephine's answer. So we've spent all this money and done all this stuff. When are we going to get out of jail? And my second question is, what other cities in New Zealand have summer water restrictions, and are we one of the few that don't?
I'll probably let Mark answer that one, but we will be having summer water, some form of restrictions all summer this summer. But the addition of those supplies and the investment that councillors have authorised actually makes the option of enabling the adjustments that we're talking today possible. So that's what you get for the investment, is the relief to those small businesses and the ability for homeowners, hopefully in December, to be able to use that water outside. But Mark, you might be able to answer the second part of Councillor Simpson's question.
Certainly. So Auckland's been in a very fortunate position insofar as our water supply system has been very resilient over the past 25 years. But it's certainly not an uncommon occurrence for water restrictions to be put in place around New Zealand over the summer months. So our nearest two cities, Hamilton to the south and Whangarei to the north, both have regular water restrictions over the summer period. In fact, Wellington will be imposing their summer restrictions as daylight saving comes in. So certainly not unusual.
So you don't foresee, even with all our investment, residential water restrictions going away in the future?
I think so. I guess just to clarify my points, I think it's about that summertime water use and responsible summertime water use. So we need to probably move from a totally unrestricted and not valuing that water to putting in pragmatic restrictions every summer to curb those 580 million litre days, that kind of thing.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I think, the biggest part of the money we put aside, Desley, the 145 million for the Tuakau water treatment plant, that won't come into effect until next winter. But I don't think we're in jail. We're in a very mild form of home detention at the moment. Jail is when you have to actually, stop companies from operating the normal working week because we've run out of water. And that was a big fear that we had, as all of us will recall, back in May. So what we've done in saving water and what we've done in increasing the supply actually has kept us at a situation that is far more acceptable, but still an irritant. And hopefully, if we get the rain and the storage levels go up, we can ease that too by the end of November. I've got two more questions. Councillor Shane Henderson.
Sorry, and I originally took myself off the list, but after hearing one of the answers, I thought I actually would ask the question I was going to. So it's an extension of Councillor Dalton's excellent question on sports fields. And just briefly, our sports clubs are doing it bloody tough coming out of COVID, and that's having huge effects on the community. So two-parter. Do you have an insight into the consequences on the sports sector for the proposed restrictions outlined in the resolution? And second question, if water restrictions are the new norm, and I suggest they will be, how are you working with sports clubs on water issues?
Okay, perhaps I'll respond to that. In terms of if restrictions do become the new norm, we will need to work with sports clubs, but it's also tied in with looking for alternative forms of water. So we are actively, at the moment, the vast majority of our sports fields are irrigated using potable water. So the view is in the future, and that's not going to be possible. We need to move away from that option. So there's bores, stormwater detention ponds, there's a variety of other uses, and as I indicated earlier, we're looking, for example, to perhaps trial reuse of wastewater on some sports grounds on the shore adjacent to the sewage treatment plant. But there's no doubt we will need to work with sports organisations. We're not alone. Australia has some great experience that we need to hook into and understand, and certainly that's a great sporting nation. So they've overcome it, and we need to do the same. The second was around the impact, the immediate impact for next summer on our on sporting community sport across the city. So at the moment, many of our sports fields are being irrigated, and that's because we have available quite sophisticated soil moisture testing and so forth that allows us to use minimal water, and we have been doing that all the way through. We've also been using non-potable water as well for those sports grounds that are not subject to irrigation. But we're actively looking to ensure that those sports fields are available, and we will need to look at perhaps tankering in water, that type of thing, in order to ensure that that takes place.
Thank you. And this time the last question, Councillor Wayne Walker. Wayne, if you take your chance, or we're going to move right on. You there, Councillor Walker? Okay. Have you got your microphone on, Councillor? I think we've lost him. So I think we'll move on now to comments, and we've already got a list starting off with comments. And the first comment is Councillor Angela Dalton.
I was changing my comments. Yes, I do. Look, I want to begin by thanking Aucklanders for the huge effort that they've made in achieving the savings over this year. And it's been through the most challenging of times with COVID lockdowns. We've been at home, potentially able to use more water, but Aucklanders really rose to the challenge. And they've succeeded in being one of the best, if not the best, cities in New Zealand in terms of water conservation during lockdown. I think we should give Aucklanders credit for being able to move in and out of restrictions as well, because it's become our new norm under COVID. And perhaps what we need to do is follow the example of the government and use the same languaging of moving between alert levels, because this is something that we need to live with now, perhaps needs to be part of our comm strategy. I know many people who rely on their gardens as a food source, particularly in the south and the west, I'm sure, but they also rely on them as a form of therapy. And my mum's one of those, it's a way to keep connected and balanced when things are not going so well, or even just on a daily basis to find their tranquility and calm. And so the current water restrictions have been tough on them. And Councillor Alf somewhat alluded to the barrier our communities have in purchasing water blasting services and the benefit that they gain from being able to grow their own vegetables. So I do have some sympathy for the residential recommendations from Watercare when I think about those people. I'd like to also acknowledge the businesses who have implemented the improvements that have resulted in such great savings, and the report has listed some of them. The 20% savings, or up to, from Frucor, Lion, Griffins, Chelsea Sugar, and Auckland Council at an amazing 30% savings is showing great leadership and good relationships and understanding between those organisations and Council and Watercare. I think that's a real credit to them, especially the commercial operators who have had to continue on these stricter restrictions. It's put a huge amount of stress on their businesses and on their workers, up to 1,000 people, disproportionately so. And so today I will be supporting the lifting of water restrictions so they continue to work to full capacity. Auckland's Emergency Committee resolved on the 7th of May 2020 that restrictions would remain in place until it was satisfied, based on the advice from Watercare, that it was appropriate to lift water level restrictions and that there no longer be a risk to the adequate supply of drinking water. And we've been presented with recommendations from Watercare. And I'm satisfied with the advice from Watercare. And I've been encouraged and certainly more informed by the many, many workshops that we've been holding together recently. I was particularly impressed by the workshop we had on Monday and the contestable and informative contributions of the Watercare board and management team. And I have confidence in their advice on lifting the restrictions. Just back to the fields, and it is more of an LTP discussion. It's not necessarily about the discussion today around lifting the restrictions, but we have to continue to keep in mind what is going to be put into our long-term plan. So 850 sports fields across our network is significant. And we need to ensure that we do what we need to do to maintain the integrity and quality of our field services. So some work has been done. I've read that in the report. Council community facilities are working really hard to do their best to make sure that our fields are looked after. But like everything else that we're talking about, there is a climate change impact, and it must be funded into the LTP, and it must be funded as our business, as usual now, is to respond to climate change in everything that we do. And these fields are impacted. They have been impacted by not having the level of investment they should have been having up to this point, and now it's worse. And so let's make sure we get that right as we go into the long-term plan, because those renewals are weak at the moment. So my position is that I sit in support of the continuance of the 5% savings over summer, and I think it is right that we look at this is how it's going to be forever. We should have restrictions during summer, and the adjustments as recommended by Watercare to the stage 1 water use restrictions. And just thank you again to the Aucklanders for letting this happen, because they've made the savings that we can have this conversation today. Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Councillor Al Filipaina.
Thank you, Your Worship, and also thank you to the team who's presented. Angela's covered most of what I wanted to say, so I'm not going to go over what Angela has said. And what I do, however, acknowledge the work that Rod Sheridan and his team have done, who I've contacted over the last few months around our parks, Your Worship. But look, I do, however, wanted to speak further on the questions that I posed around our low socioeconomic areas, but also the people in them. And I know that there are renters, that the majority of people in the ward that both Councillor Collins and I represent, and obviously others, that the majority are renters. But in particular, Your Worship, I just wanted to sort of speak on the house and the water blasting of, and as well as the decks. I ended up speaking to the people at Exterior Cleaning Industry Association. I just wanted to get some clarification, in particular of what we were presented when it was put to us that 0.07% was the use that they had. But I got my question. I got the answer to my question of clarification, and that was, what would the industry, the water blasting industry that the Exterior Cleaning Industry Association represent, how much water would they use? And the answer I got back was 0.035. Half of what we were told, because the figure we had with 0.07 was all the commercial entities using the water. So, Your Worship, I definitely will be supporting the changes, and only E, I will not be supporting G, which excludes the residential areas. I think that after speaking to the sector and knowing that with the photos I saw, that the mould, the moss, the algae will deteriorate the houses, the paintwork, the decks. It then becomes, I believe, a health issue on the decks in regards to people slipping because they haven't had the opportunity to do it. As Angela said just previously, Your Worship, about number 3 in our report around the Aucklanders have responded well to the restrictions. I believe that we need that they need to be trusted again. And I believe they should not be excluded in regards to the recommendations we have there. But Your Worship, like I said, I will be, Sandra, if you could note my opposition to G against excluding the residential homes, that would be great. So, Your Worship, that's where my thoughts are. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. That's been noted, and of course, just a month after it's lifted on commercial, there will be a chance to re-examine whether we're able to lift the residential restrictions as well, and that will depend on the evidence given to us. We now have Councillor Daniel Newman.
Thank you, Your Worship, and can I request, Sandra, that my a similar vote for me on G. I will be. I'd like to have my vote recorded against G, as per what Councillor Filipaina has requested. If I could please have my vote recorded against that as well, Your Worship. The great thing about a longitudinal study is that it gets better over time, and so with each year of information that we have in relation to the outcome for the year in terms of rainfall, the integrated source management model that Watercare applies is better informed. And what we have is an ISMM with a 99.9% reliability. I don't know anyone else who has a better model, frankly. And so I am comfortable with the information that I have from Watercare. I'm also comfortable with the additional water sources that are coming into service over the financial year. Now, the Chair of the Board of Watercare is under no illusions as to what my thoughts are in relation to Hayes Creek, and the timing of other changes. She has seen my comments. I have spoken to her. I've spoken to Watercare officers. I've spoken to officers about the timing of some of these investments. But the reality is now those additional water sources are coming in this financial year. that sits alongside the sacrifices that Aucklanders have made and which it appears they will continue to make. The challenge here is that we're going to be treating different customers differently according to residential or commercial use. And my view is that I have become concerned that my constituents and Aucklanders in general are feeling increasingly like they do all the heavy lifting. They do the heavy lifting and the infrastructure continues to grind and fail, whether it be the Takanini off-ramp, whether it be our water supply, whether it be the Auckland Harbour Bridge. Aucklanders suffer more. The cost of living in Auckland goes up and up and up, and still we will require them to make greater sacrifices, bake in those sacrifices as permanent sacrifices in summer. But when you listen to the information that has been provided and you look at the ISMM, I'm comfortable actually that we can provide some concession. It's not a large concession, but it is some concession for our residential customers. Your Worship, the other thing I want to note, yes, I accept the challenge of the unpredictability on the future around the issue of climate change and the consequences of climate change, whatever that may be in terms of supply and the need to restrict water usage. But it's not just about climate change. Actually, the one thing that we know has changed in recent years is population growth. Our council has been very permissive in accommodating all the growth, huge demand as a result of that growth on the supply of water, potable water, and that has been the thing more than anything else that has squeezed the capacity of Watercare to provide for potable water to households. So I think that the two things that we can absolutely agree on is the longitudinal information that informs the ISMM, and we can agree on the growth because the growth has occurred. And to ask one group of Aucklanders to make a continued sacrifice so that another group of Auckland customers can enjoy a concession, including Auckland Council, which is one of the biggest water users, I think is tough. So I agree with the recommendations, with the exception being G, and if my vote can be recorded against, I'd be grateful.
Thank you. Councillor John Watson.
Yeah, thanks very much, Mr. Mayor. I think earlier on the piece, one of the officers said that we were taking a cautious approach. I think we're taking a very cautious approach, and I don't think that that's always a bad thing, but I think that we do have to recognise some of the power of the information that we've received in terms of the success in cutting consumption, the additional supplies that are coming on, and the long-term weather forecast, albeit that's uncertain. As Councillor Dalton said, Aucklanders have responded really well. I mean, if we just look at this last month of August, for instance, had a target of 405 megalitres per day, and that was achieved down to 370 during that month there. If we look at the overall savings, since May, I think there was up about 2.6 billion litres since the restrictions were in force. So Aucklanders have been responding really well, as indeed have we, Mr. Mayor, yourself, and Watercare itself, in terms of the projects that will be coming online, the additional 40 million litres a day by Christmas, and then a further 66 expected by mid-2021. So they're very encouraging, as indeed is the response of Watercare to its attempt to reduce the leak and pressure reduction program. So by July next year, for instance, 6,000 kilometres of the pipe will be checked, and that's almost 2/3 of our network. So I think there's been a lot that's happened in a relatively short space of time, and that the people involved in that deserve some due recognition. I think that the recommendations that we got earlier in the week were perhaps I was going to say less cautious. They're not less cautious. They're perhaps more realistic in terms of the overall likelihood of how things are going to pan out over the summer, and they really move more towards a fairer, more even-handed approach in terms of the distinction between residential and commercial, and recognise that great response from Aucklanders, and really suggesting that Aucklanders should be rewarded for their efforts in that respect. But balancing that, and I think this is certainly where you're coming from, Mr. Mayor, is a need to remind people of the severity of the drought, its ongoing impact, and that's as important now as ever. So I guess when I weigh it all up, I thought there was an opportunity today to extend it to the residential users if we have to wait a couple of months before we make that assessment again. I don't think that's going to be disastrous in the overall scheme of things. I am very pleased that the efforts of the exterior cleaning industry, who employ a significant number of people, who have really gone out of their way to introduce best practice and to take a long-term water conservationist view, has been recognised, as indeed, as Councillor Filipaina said, as their relatively small use in the scheme of things. So that's the important outcome for today, and I certainly congratulate the leadership of Raveen Jadaram in dealing with that organisation and coming to this conclusion, as indeed with the performance of Watercare over these last few months. I think that's been reassuring, and certainly that was what emerged very clearly from the workshop that we got. So I guess on balance, Mr. Mayor, I'll be supporting the recommendations because it does deal to this rather perverse outcome that was developing, whereby we were going to have the people who work in the exterior cleaning business conceivably driven out of business, and I don't think that's an exaggeration to say that was a cost, an outcome. They've been through sort of unparalleled pressure in terms of COVID-19, the decline in demand, the additional costs that they've had to fork out for equipment and so forth. So I'm glad that there's some ability now that these restrictions will aid them, and I look forward to coming back to this in a couple of months' time and to perhaps securing that rather more even-handed response to our residents as well, and I'm reasonably confident that that's going to be the outcome, come the start of December or the end of November when we come to that. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Deputy Mayor Bill Cashmore.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you to all the staff and to Watercare for the information, the detailed data that was presented in this case. Mr. Mayor, I got a very salutary lesson last summer when I watched some of my constituents in Beachlands lining up with 20-litre buckets, containers, to take their water back. It's a settlement of 8,000 people that doesn't have a reticulated system. And those people were really grateful for work that Andrew Chin and Healthy Waters did in supplying that water. And a couple of weeks later, the big tankers arrived and that enabled them to actually, the water delivery people, to do more deliveries a day and to catch up on the massive backlog that was there because of the unprecedented circumstances that we faced at that time. Last Sunday, Mr. Mayor, I went to the top of the farm. You know where that is. You look over all of Auckland from up there, and the Hunua dams are literally just a hand's throw away. Our farm goes further into the Hunua ranges than anyone else. So I got a really good idea how wet or dry it is up there. And in my 45 years of agricultural experience, I've never seen that country so dry. Never. We drove across it in a Land Cruiser 4x4, and you couldn't even see where we'd been. And I've never been up there in the winter before in a Land Cruiser Often the farm bikes can't get up there, and we drove up there in two-wheel drive. I might admit they was subconscious, because I just didn't feel a need to put it into four-wheel drive. And then sort of had that sort of panic moment when you start to slide backwards. It was that dry. So we must take a precautionary approach. And there are other solutions for residential people for cleaning verandas. And I had the misfortune to live in a 1904 villa. It's got these verandas all the way around it. I don't water blast those, so I'll end up painting every 5 minutes. So I use a lemon-based natural solution in a bucket and a mop. You put it on and you mop it off, and it cleans off the mould and slime and gunge perfectly well. So it's a good product and it's inexpensive. Precautionary approach means the residential people who use 70% of our water might have to wait another couple of months before they get it opened up for them. I think that is sound precautionary effects given how dry it is and our current dam levels. However, but we have more supply coming on stream, and I must, Mr. Mayor, acknowledge you, but also the good people of Hamilton, Hamilton City Council, the Regional Council, the Waikato River Authority and Tainui, who gathered around us in our time of need, said we will do what we can to help you. And thank you. Thank you, Russ Remington. Thank you, the chairs of the Regional Council and the District Council and the Hamilton City Council. Because in our time of need, they gave us some assistance. And they want us to carry on with our summer restrictions just like they have. And that's quite fair and inevitable that we should do that. We will relook at these results, where our dam level's at, what our new infrastructure delivery is actually doing. In late November, the governing body will have the data then. So we'll be able to make a call on residential decisions then. But I urge councillors, this drought is not over. It's 2 years going and living still. We must take precautionary figures, or you may see people in your street standing with 20 litres containers in urban streets lining up to get water. And that is a vision, believe you me, is quite shocking. So I urge you to think on that, on how you vote. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you very much, Councillor Cashmore. And Councillor Wayne Walker. Hopefully we've got you this time, Councillor. We've got you online, Councillor, but we can't hear you. Can you check your mute button? I'll just give you a little bit and then we'll come back to you if need be. Okay, I'm sorry you're having those
Speaking
problems.
in favour of the recommendation?
I can hear you now, Councillor. Please make your contribution.
Sure. So I'm in support of the recommendation. Fundamentally, a number of things have changed since last year. Uppermost is the certainty of supply. So even given a circumstance where the dam levels may be down over summer, we're rapidly moving to a situation where a far greater percentage of our water is much more certain. The second factor is since last year, there have been fairly dramatic conservation efforts across some industries, and there can be more. And I'm assuming that that best practice is being locked in, and there'll be more of it. And then the other factor that I think is significant is that Watercare and Auckland Council know that we can make even more savings through the installation of smart meters, through more best practice that can go across a range of industries. And in that respect, I'd just like to acknowledge the exterior cleaning industry who are leading the way in that respect. And I would hope that more of that follows. And we also know that there is a huge potential to tap into conservation, the installation of water tanks across properties. And I think that we're going to be well placed to weather any circumstance into the future if we can bring all of those things on. So against that background, I think it is entirely appropriate to ensure that jobs can stay in industries like exterior cleaning that would otherwise be affected, because why should they suffer when other industries aren't suffering because they can use water internally? So again, I would urge councillors to support the recommendations. They're pragmatic and they're sensible, and I hope they go through.
Thank you very much, Councillor, and we were pleased to get you online. Councillor Chris Darby.
Thanks, Mayor. Look, while I really appreciate the technical advice here, looking at this is really thorough, and so thanks to Watercare and Healthy Waters and everybody else. As others have acknowledged also, I want to acknowledge Aucklanders for playing their part, and they play their part quite seriously, and I know that Aucklanders have got in behind this campaign and responded well. Hamiltonians have got in behind it as well, so thank you to the good people of the Waikato, and including Waikato Tainui, I do stress. And a lot of good work to augment that supply coming in coming months. But I understand the need to relax slightly the commercial restrictions. I'm, along with the Deputy Mayor, very much on the cautious side going forward here, very much. Probably to the point of being ultra cautious. And I would hope that all of us are, because there is one thing that is certain at the moment, is uncertainty. And it's with this, it's with COVID, it's with a lot of things that we're facing in Auckland. But around this particular issue, I remind members again, and while we've augmented supply through some great work that's been done by our various teams and politically with the Mayor and Deputy Mayor in negotiations with Hamilton, we are, as of today, still 22% behind where we were this time last year when we led into a drought. This time last year, we actually had a lot of rain. Right about now, we had a lot of rain. Today, one of the councillors said earlier, oh, it's raining. Today's rain turned out to be a drizzle. There was hardly any rain today. And while we've been having this meeting, I've been monitoring the Met Service forecast, and their forecast has gone from, I think it was started out at about 8 millimetres forecast for generally Auckland, a little bit more for the Hunuas. It is now down to 4.6. So that's how things change so quickly. 5 millimetres is not enough to dampen your tea bag. It's very little. And at the moment, as the Deputy Mayor's just reminded us, we've got soil moisture deficits growing right now. So we're past 3 days. We're 3 days past the spring equinox. The sun's getting stronger, and the wind will come with that as well. That dries it out a bit more, and the days are getting longer. So we're into the big dry period now. It's just the natural way of going that it turns up. So that is the reality of it. And I don't think we should forget that when we think about just striking out the G. I think Aucklanders are playing their part and will continue to play their part in the residential sector. They also are probably really supportive of making sure industries get going again and create employment and create a little bit of financial churn. That's what we need on the back of the COVID situation that we are still in. It's not going, we are still in it, and there's a long way to get out of it. So 22% today behind in our storage levels. That is a long way to go before we replenish those big dams in the Hunua, which are, you know, they're only just a little bit over half full at the moment. So my caution to members in striking out the G is think of the future. Think of the very near future. Think of this summer. Try to backcast. Put yourself in January and backcast and imagine what decisions were made prior to the arrival of this January, February, March, April. Remember, that's how long the drought was? May, in fact. So I'll support these relaxations, these very well-considered relaxations, Mayor, but to go any further at this time, it is a very high risk.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Councillor Josephine Bartley.
Thank you, Your Worship. I want to acknowledge the Waikato River, the Manawhenua, Tainui Regional, Waikato Regional Council, Hamilton City Council, for helping us because of the drought that we're experiencing in Auckland, and also acknowledge everyone that's been saving water because we're in this drought. I feel sorry for the Exterior Cleaning Industry Association that they have been unduly affected because of the position that we are in as a city, but I cannot support the lifting, amending restrictions because of the reports we're seeing that the lake levels are still below what's needed to alleviate any risk to adequate supply of drinking water. Can't really rely on the rainfall forecasts as we're in this drought because of the dry months. I don't think that the comms strategy will work to prevent runaway usage. Because even though you say lifting, it's not lifting, it's amending, to me that's semantics, and it'll be seen out there as making an exception for one group over everyone else. I take on board the assertion from our officers in question time that water shortages are the new normal. And I think with that comes adjustments that need to be made to life and, what we can expect to be able to use water and how we use water. I don't mean to be negative, and I don't like giving a speech filled with a lot of can'ts and don'ts, but I don't feel Watercare has dealt with this drought with much urgency since, the issues were first raised. Even councillors have also advocated to Watercare to use the word urgent, to use the word crisis in their comm strategy, which is why I don't have that faith that the comm strategy will be able to do what we're hoping it will do in terms of the runaway usage. But there just still doesn't seem to be that sense of consistency in messaging that we are in a drought, that this is a crisis. The messages I look on social media, no hoses or water blasters, save 20 litres. So still, not that sense of urgency. I think I'm not normally conservative, I don't think, but because we are in a crisis, I'm going to go with being conservative because I think it is justified to be worried and to be cautious. And cautious to me is not any kind of relaxation. I'm going to read this message I got from a constituent because I did what people told me not to do, which is read social media comments. But this comment was, it would be also a good start for you councillors to actually get the CCOs, which Watercare is a council-controlled organisation, to answer why they have let it get to this stage. So much for the super city saving money and being efficient. This is on you, Josephine. You wanted to be elected, you sorted out. So for me, I'm looking at the collective, I'm looking at being conservative. I want to make sure there is enough drinking water for all our communities, for everyone. So I'm not supporting relaxing any restrictions. I think we should carry on and keep the restrictions in place because we are not out of this drought and we can't rely on rain. So yeah, I think we have to be careful, and that's the way I'm going to vote. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Councillor Desley Simpson.
Thanks, Your Worship. Look, I want to start by thanking you because, you were the one that got in your car with colleagues and went down to the Waikato and did the deal and actually helped our supply. And I think without that, we would have been really up the creek without a paddle. So I really want. I'm not very good at my analogies today, but I just really want to say I think that's really, really important. So I want to say thank you. You did it first. It wasn't Watercare that did it. It was you. So thank you very much for that. But I also acknowledge that spring is an interesting season, isn't it? And I acknowledge that we're going to have water restrictions all over summer. But I'm thinking about now. I am a little bit concerned. We've got one of the biggest supermarket chains in New Zealand, out there with their little gardeners packages and encourage people to plant and that will need watering. I would have liked to have given the residential ratepayer the opportunity to sensibly use water from their hose with a nozzle. I would have liked to have done that. And I don't think that everyone would have rushed out and every house in Auckland would have been water blasted by a homeowner. But I am a bit concerned that, we're doing one thing for one and not another. So those who can afford the water blasting to prepare their homes for summer and for the Christmas period, that can afford to get commercial operators to do it will do that. But those who can't won't. I would have liked to have seen J amended instead of by December to amended to the November 27th governing body meeting. But in essence, I'm speaking in support of the recommendations. I think we've got to a good place, and I support the recommendations and that Watercare have given us around that. It's just that I am a little bit worried about G. I would have loved to have had the opportunity to see if Aucklanders could have done a little bit voluntarily, noting that they have exceeded the target so far in savings of water, to actually know that they keep their showers short. They may use the old batch scenario for not flush for number one in the sun, and maybe but be able just to use a bit of restriction around hose use with a nozzle. I would have liked to have seen that. So my vote on G is probably against, but everything else I'm very happy with, and thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Councillor Richard Hills.
Thank you, Mayor Goff. I can see where I feel this is going, and I have some serious concerns. I have concerns about the fairness too, but if the fairness has to be moved, my opinion is everything should be in December. My concern is then the complete and obvious presentation from the water blasters that they are such a small percentage of the take, and they are losing jobs and income at a time we can't lose jobs and income. I totally agree with Councillor Filipaina and others around the fairness to those residents who can't just afford a water blaster. But my issue is, I think the cost that we may put to all our residents is that we could, and we don't know, but we could end up in far greater restrictions if we jump into this too fast. And for those who say, that there is the 99.9% or 99 anyway, very high chances that we'll be okay. Well, that is not why we just spent $224 million on emergency infrastructure. That is why the Watercare Asset Management Plan in 2017-18 and 18 did not include any of this infrastructure that we've suddenly needed. That is why we didn't ask the right questions, obviously, over the last few years to ensure we were protecting our water supply, and that we knew that if we had a long drought like we've had, that we would have been ready. We weren't. Watercare wasn't. We had to spend $224 million during an emergency budget where we lost $500 million to ensure that we have more supply. My personal view would be, for everyone who had to pay that extra rates and put the extra concern into our budget, was because of the Watercare assets that we are building. Those aren't ready till December. So we're going to start things off and potentially, where I think some councillors are going, everyone will have a change in water access, basically, much sooner than those 10 to 15 litres extra are going to be available. And we are 20% behind, and we're going into summer with, we got up to 90% at Christmas. our dams looked mighty fine during last summer, but then we very, very, very quickly drained them. And, you know, it is a risk that that happens again. Yes, people are more concerned about water and are doing an amazing job. Like, I've been so impressed, and it's been awesome to see everyone, the messages and comments that I get all over social media all the time of people's different ways they're saving water, and clearly on a citywide basis we're doing that. But if we do the same thing again, can you imagine what people are going to be like in March, April next year if we have to go into a serious restriction again, if we had the same sort of drought on top of what we've already got, even with that extra supply? So I'm worried. I think I'm going to have to oppose. If councillors are pushing to move everyone in October, then it's a super risk, especially with climate change, especially with the fact that we didn't, and for the last 2 weeks, we have hovered, but we've actually gone backwards. We went up 1% in the last month and have gone backwards. During COVID lockdown level 4, we were still at 480 million litres a day, even with most industry shut down. So imagine how much higher it could have been, much like those January levels of 580 million. So I'm just really worried that we're going to make a knee-jerk decision here and put our whole city at risk before we have all that extra supply on board that we asked people to contribute to a couple of months ago. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Shane Henderson.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. And I've come to this one with a bit of a clouded mind and a lump in my throat. I literally had no idea how I was going to land, and have listened to my colleagues and to the advice and to the presentations very, very carefully to come to my view. Firstly, I want to point out the wise words of Councillor Filipaina, and to say, look, we, in my view, cannot create a distortion where we're lifting restrictions for one sector but keeping them for another. You know, frankly, coming from a ward like Waitakere, most of my residents can't afford to hire professional services. And I just don't think that's consistent and fair for people, really. But I really want to acknowledge the words of Councillor Bartley and also Deputy Mayor Cashmore to urge caution on this situation. You know, I've always said, and I've said it a number of times around this table, that while the severity of the drought wasn't predictable, the drought itself was absolutely predictable. And my residents ask me about this all the time, just like they asked Councillor Bartley. And I would ask my colleagues, are we more likely or less likely to go into a drought next year? And the year after that, and the year after that? This is the reality of climate change, and we've received the advice today around that some level of water restrictions will become increasingly normal for Aucklanders. And therefore we just have to be cautious and very aware of the gravity of that opinion. It really weighs on me, but I do have to express it. Just like Councillor Bartley, I've been contacted a lot, particularly by Waitaku Rangers side of my ward, saying, how did we get to this position? We knew this was coming. They know rain up there, that's for sure. And they ask me, what have I done to put the pressure on and to make sure that people are accountable for those decisions, and that we're actually urgent and we're actually being as cautious as we can be. So I hope that with my vote, I will be able to answer those people. So my message basically to my colleagues and to everyone that might be following along is that Aucklanders have done so well to get to this point. They've made sacrifices, they have done a brilliant job. Now let's finish that job. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Henderson. And the last speaker till I speak and reply is Councillor Chris Fletcher.
Oh, thank you, Your Worship. I don't intend to repeat everything that has been said on both sides, but I would, like others, like to thank Aucklanders. I would like to thank yourself and Councillor Cashmore, and I'd like to thank all of the officers that have worked on this, and I certainly welcome the recommendations that are being put to us now, with the exception of G, and that's really why I wanted to speak very briefly. And it comes down to trust, that we've received advice from the Watercare Board. We've got quite a lot of information before us. And it really is one of, do we trust Aucklanders to be able to be responsive, as they've shown, I think, very successfully with COVID, or are they just going to indulge in runaway demand, and then it's all going to be doom and gloom? But, the reality is that we do have more supply coming on stream. We do have this report today that can give us some measure of comfort. And for me, I have confidence in Watercare. I have confidence in the advice that they have given us. Interesting that the CCO review that you commissioned, Your Worship, spoke so highly of Watercare. And for that reason, I am willing to actually put my faith in Watercare today, and to put my faith in Aucklanders, that if we can enable them to be trusted to start to use a little more water in their gardens and so forth, that they're not going to go wild and crazy. And if the situation changes, that they can be trusted to understand the communications that we put to them. It's the value judgment that I've made in terms of deciding to want to have a division on G is around that trust. And I do trust Aucklanders. I think they've shown considerable maturity right through this period. Whether it's mothers with babies not having baby baths in the way that they have, or the way that we've cared for our gardens. But others spoke, and I don't want to repeat it, but the importance of gardening through this very difficult year that we've had. And right on Mental Health Week, if you want to try and give encouragement to those that are struggling at the moment, it can be to get their fingers dirty and do a bit of gardening. And I think, without jeopardising anything, and I'm normally the first in terms of taking a precautionary approach to things, but I think we are taking a precautionary approach if we can trust Aucklanders, and I trust them. And so for that reason, I have requested a division on G, but welcome all of the other recommendations, and particularly welcome the opportunity for the commercial operators to be able to get on with the business of working and making a livelihood for their families. So thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you. And next speaker, Councillor Linda Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And certainly what I wanted to say when I first reserved my right to speak has changed. I do support these recommendations, and listening to everybody's got valid points. But I suppose where I come right down to it is, this is about striking a balance, about being cautious, but at the same time giving some relief. This is not about business against residential. It's not trading that off for me. It's about holding off the highest users to wait a bit longer till we have a little bit more certainty. And I think that's really important. I do thank you, Mr. Mayor, but also I think it was Councillor Simpson that said it was you that went down south along with the Deputy Mayor. You did, but also Margaret Devlin of Watercare, the Watercare Chair, went with you and you worked together. And I want to acknowledge everybody in both organisations, of which we are all one family, have worked together so diligently and collaboratively over this whole time. So I think that's been a real win. Out of a bit of a crisis has come some really good work and relationship building, and I think that will stand us in good stead. I think we're right. We are going to face restrictions every summer. This is the reality of our changing climate, but it's also the reality of growth. We can build more infrastructure, but if it doesn't rain, that infrastructure doesn't get filled up. And so I support these recommendations and have moved them because I think that I'm concerned that if people vote against this totally, you will get a win for full open slather, because then that means that the residential right will open up. And I do think our community have done a massive job, But I think if you take that away, people will go, oh, thank goodness. Oh, I can just get back to business, do what I want to do. And I think people need guidance. And if they know what is expected of them, they'll do it. But if we don't have any restrictions, which fundamentally this will be, then we'll end up where we were before. And I'm very mindful of the fact that if we make a wrong decision today by opening up restrictions too quickly and too fully, it will come back on us, not on Watercare. Watercare have recommended that we are careful, and with our staff and Watercare together have agreed that we need to take the staged approach. So it will come back on us because the decision is the governing body's decision. So no one will be able to blame anybody else except ourselves if we go too hard too early by opening up. So I think this strikes a good balance. It gives us about 6 weeks or so to really look at how that impacts our water supply, whether the exterior, it's not just the exterior users, exterior cleaning association, it's places like nurseries. There's a whole lot of people that will be able to use water again, but it's not a massive amount. But we need to be able to measure that before we go into the next and the highest users. So for me, I would ask councillors who are thinking of voting against this totally to think again and think about this balanced approach. This is a real compromise. This is not full on, but it gives a small bit of respite to people who have been heavily affected by COVID in terms of their businesses, but now will be able to work in a better way than they did before because they've got together and they've realised, using potable water isn't ideal for cleaning outside. It's really treated for drinking. So this starts that dialogue and that action about using water sustainably and us developing more potable water. So I think that, and this is not about rewards, because I heard one councillor talking about, we need rewarded because we've been good. This is not about that. This is about the serious management of the water that we do have. And it might mean that, we've always got restrictions in summer, but we'll have to learn that over time. We'll have to get better at it, and we'll have to plan ahead a lot better than we have done. So I urge people who think they want to vote against this to be careful, because it might deliver a perverse outcome. It might deliver the full slather. So I just commend everybody who's worked on this and the consideration everybody's had to give to this. It's not easy. Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you very much, Councillor. And if I can just finish up as the last speaker, I want to start by thanking both our council officers and Watercare for the immense amount of work that went into these recommendations and this paper. And I want to particularly include in that the chair of the board of Watercare, Margaret Devlin, who has worked just extraordinary. I've never seen the chair of a board work as long hours and hard as she has over recent months. And I really want to put that on record and commend her for it. Can I just remind councillors, because there seems to be some confusion here, this is a joint recommendation from Council and Watercare. Watercare board made a slightly different set of recommendations. They listened to further evidence and further discussion, including our own workshops, and they have joined up with our council officers for one set of recommendations supported by both. And as Councillor Cooper has just said, this was about finding a balance. Yep, sure, look, I acknowledge the point that Councillor Filipaina made, that there's a degree of unfairness here that a commercial organisation can wash a house down, but a private person can't. And I feel uncomfortable about that. But I tell you what, I feel a lot more uncomfortable if we open, so I'm trying not to mix metaphors, open the floodgates and allow everybody to do that and find that we get the perverse response that people think, well, if we can all do this, then there isn't a crisis anymore, everything's fine, and we don't have to worry about continuing to save. And that's the real danger in this. If we send the wrong message, all of the great work that Aucklanders have done over the last several months, we're saving 40 million litres a day. Thank you, Aucklanders, for your responsibility. To the commercial operators and the big ones, and particularly to Council. I don't want to hear any criticism of Council or that we're acting in our own interests in supporting the recommendations here. 30% savings by Auckland Council. That's great. That's what's called leadership. It's called showing the way. But also to those other big users. They have voluntarily saved water, just as the people in their homes. We haven't saved money through the hoses near as much as we have by getting the message across and people having shorter showers. That's what saved the water, and that's really important. So thank you to both the households and the commercial enterprises for playing your part in getting to where we have. But let's look at reality. We might have saved 40 million litres a day. That's what our current savings are. Bloody great, really good. We're increasing our supply by 40 million litres a day. Fantastic. You know, Watercare and Council pulling out every stop to getting more supply there. We're getting 25 million litres of that a day right now. But guess what? Despite the huge savings and despite the extra supply, our dam levels aren't rising. The last 17 days, when we're in the middle of spring, the spring rains, when we should be filling those dams, they've gone down in the last 17 days. They've gone down. To reach that target of 75% full by 1 November, we will have to have twice as, well, 50% more rain than what we've had in the last 5 weeks in the next 5 weeks. And frankly, I can't promise you that's going to happen. And when I looked at I'm waving my phone to those that are online, looked at the 10-day forecast, it was going to rain today. Councillor Darby got it absolutely right. We were going to get at least 8 millimetres, not very much, but would have really helped. Now it's been revised down to half that amount. And in the next 10 days, we've got 1 day where they use the word rain. We'll get a few showers, but 1 day in the next 10 days. And I'm sorry, councillors, I'm not prepared to gamble on it raining and saying we can be more generous. We'd really like to be generous in lifting all of those restrictions, but will anybody thank us? Will anybody thank us if at the end of this process we lift the restrictions, only have to slap on even worse restrictions within a couple of months because we're running the risk? Now look, I've looked at the integrated source management model, and generally you'd think that'd work pretty bloody well. But guess what? It didn't tell us last year or this year that we were going to strike unprecedented droughts. It didn't tell us that. And, you know, I'm really worried that we haven't built climate change into this and that we will get a 3rd year's drought in a row. Every morning I wake up praying for bloody rain, but, you know, it's not happening and I can't guarantee it. And I don't want to go out and face people up and say, hey, sorry, we gave you the wrong message. You can ease off the restrictions now, you know, but sorry, in a couple of months' time, we're going to have industry working 4 days a week. We didn't predict it. That's the whole thing. The model failed. We didn't predict it. And it's been failing for some years because we put off capital works that probably should have come forward. And that's why, as Councillor Desley will rue, we had to put $224 million into the budget this year at the time of the emergency budget to bring forward the stuff that we'd put back because we relied on the model. We can't rely on the model. And we have to make sure that Aucklanders do have ongoing water supply. So I think those are the main messages. I think we have got the balance here. Please don't give me the perverse response by voting against this because you think that we shouldn't be lifting it at all, or voting against it because we should be going further and lifting it. Actually, if we do that, we'll end up with a status quo. We won't be changing anything. And if you vote against G, I'm sorry, G is a noting recommendation. It won't make any difference. I would much rather see this council come together, work together to get a sensible message out to the public. Yes, we've done well. Please keep it up. Yes, we can ease the restrictions on some of the commercial operators because that means jobs. That's the extra dimension for the commercial people as against the residences. And in 8 weeks' time, we've got a chance with much better information to decide whether or not we can afford to ease the restrictions on households. We will know then better what the summer weather forecast will look like. We will know then whether we've achieved the goal of 75%. We will know then whether there is a risk of having to have more severe restrictions during summer or not. But if we do it now, I believe that we're acting prematurely. So, look, thank you everyone for the input that you've had. You've all thought really clearly about this. You've all spoken from your hearts about it. We may have slightly different views, but by and large, just as Watercare and Auckland Council came together around the same set of recommendations, I'd really like to see the vast majority of councillors do the same today in approving this paper. So it's been asked that we have a division on G, which I'm happy to take separately. It's only a noting recommendation, so it won't make any difference to what we're actually doing. If councillors wanted a division on E, which is approving the commercial easing, I will do that if it's requested. Otherwise, I will put all of the recommendations bar G together first and then take a division on the noting recommendation G. Okay, I haven't had any dissent registered from that, either online or in the room. So I will put recommendations A through to F inclusive and H through to K inclusive, and I'll do that on the voices. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Against?
No.
So I've got, if you'd like to record your no, it's Councillor Bartley and Councillor Henderson and Councillor Hills. Okay, I will now put recommendation G on a division and ask Sandra to call the roll.
Point of order, Your Worship.
Sorry, Councillor, I can't take a point of order in the middle of a vote. It's against standing orders.
Yeah, I wanted to say it before you put that vote, but I'll have a point of order after.
Thank you. Okay, Sandra, if you can take the division.
Councillors, you are voting on clause G as it is on the screen in front of you. Mayor Goff.
Aye.
Councillor Bartley.
Yes.
Councillor Casey.
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Cashmore.
Aye.
Councillor Collins.
Against.
Councillor Coombe.
Aye.
Councillor Cooper.
For.
Councillor Dalton.
Against.
Councillor Darby.
For.
Councillor Filipaina.
Against.
Councillor Fletcher.
Against.
Councillor Henderson.
Abstain.
Councillor Hills.
Abstained.
Councillor Mulholland.
For.
Councillor Newman.
No.
Councillor Sayers.
For.
Councillor Simpson.
Against.
Councillor Stewart.
Against.
Councillor Walker.
Against.
Councillor Watson.
For.
Councillor Young.
No.
What have we got? Carried? Carried 10 votes to 9 with 2 abstentions.
I declare that carried 10 votes to 9 with 2 extensions. Councillor, that brings us to the end of item 9. I suggest that we take a break. Point of order, Councillor Filipaina. Yes.
So, Your Worship, my point of order is in regards to your previous, and it's about process in regards to standing orders. You ended up putting the original first votes from A to F and then H to K. What happens now with L?
I'm sorry. I'm working off mine, which only takes us to K, and I did omit L. You're quite right to raise that. My apologies. I should have been working off the screen, not off the hard copy, which means that I probably need actually to put L separately. And
Your Worship, I'm happy to move L.
It's already been moved and seconded. I just forgot to put it, so I'll put that to the vote now. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye. Aye.
To those to the contrary, say no. I declare that carried, and thank you, Councillor Filipaina, for drawing that to my attention, and my apologies for missing that. Okay, well now it's just after 1:20, so I suggest that we come back at 1:50 to resume to complete the agenda. So I'll adjourn the meeting until 1:50. Thank you, councillors.